Okay, welcome to the personality chapter. So we are going to be talking about the self, who you are as a person, and your personality. So this is very based on the individual. So when we're talking about personality, what we're talking about is an organized combination of attributes, motives, values, behaviors. So who are you? What are your attitudes? What are your beliefs? Why do you do the things you do? What values do you have politically, personally, about your gender? And all of these lead to certain behaviors. So in psychology, we always recognize that behavior is not just something that happens, but it's part of who you are, and it cycles back to affect who you are as a person. So who you are affects how you behave affects who you are. So we're looking at patterns of traits. Traits that are unique to everybody. Who you are is different than everybody else, no matter how similar their personality is. And also, we generally recognize that personality is consistent across different situations and throughout your life, across time. Now, there's some argument about that. Some people believe that personality can change depending on the situation. And if you think about it, how do you act in class versus how do you act at a party with your friends? You could argue that that's a completely different personality in a lot of cases. Two terms that we're going to talk about is self-concept and self-esteem. A lot of people get confused with these. So self-concept means who you think you are. Self-esteem means how good do you think you are. Okay, so get the difference there. Self-concept is your perception of yourself. So I'm a person who is a hard worker, who cares about their family, who is quiet, is generous, maybe has a rebellious streak. Okay, so you describe who you are. That's your self-concept. Who do you think you are? Whether that's accurate or not. A victim of domestic violence might think, I'm a terrible person, I deserve to be hit, I'm not going to make it in life. So that's your self-concept. Now, how do you evaluate yourself as your self-esteem? Am I a good person or am I a bad person? And am I somebody who's worthless or somebody who is worth a lot? So self-concept, self-esteem, two totally different descriptions of personality. Okay, your identity is your overall sense of who you are. So your identity is the overall sense of who you are, or kind of like a combination of self-concept and self-esteem. You perceive yourself in a certain way, and you also have a certain value that you hold yourself in, and that together equals your identity. So when we're looking at personality, there's 5 basic principles that we work off of. First is that personality is shaped by evolution for adaptation to the environment. Now, if you don't believe in evolution, and it's a theory, so I'm not going to hold that against you, but everybody should believe in macroevolution. So there's microevolution, which is the idea that we evolve from, amoebas all the way up to monkeys and then human beings. Macroevolution is big evolution, or that there's broad conceptual changes rather than these tiny little changes that lead to dramatic differences between species. Macroevolution would be human beings macro-evolve to value relationships more. Doesn't necessarily mean that started in the caveman period, but that's something that did keep people alive. If you have a family, you do much better in life, even today. And so over the years, people who value family are much more likely to effectively raise children. And since personality is genetic, that can become part of our macroevolutionary history. Okay, so personality is shaped by evolution. It's shaped by breeding, you might say, because personality is around 50% genetic. People also differ in dispositional traits, so people have different temperaments, different characteristics of who they are as people. People differ in their characteristic adaptation. So how do you adapt to the environment around you? Some people are going to react differently because they have a different personality. Each person has a unique life story. So we talked about, I think we've talked about microenvironment in the intelligence chapter. Even if you have a twin sibling, you're going to have a unique life, even than that person who is so similar to you. Everything is at least a little bit different for each person, and so since personality is 50% genetic, 50% environment, that environment is going to have an impact on who you are. And then, of course, cultural and situational influences. These are always affecting who we are as people. You change your culture, you change your situation, that's going to have an effect on your personality. So personality, if we're looking at what the definition of personality is, it includes ways that we're like all other people, which is human nature. We're all the same in some way because we're human beings. We are like some other people, so there's groups of us that have similar dispositional traits, similar characteristic adaptations, and we're like no one else on the planet. We're completely unique in at least some ways because we all have our own microenvironments. And we're influenced by our culture and by the situation that we're in. All right, so what are the theories of personality? We, of course, have to start with Freud because Freud had something to say about everything. We've gone over this before. We know the three parts of the personality: the id, the ego, the superego. The id is the selfish part that wants to pursue pleasure. The superego is the moralistic conscience, the Jiminy Cricket conscience. And the ego is the referee that's playing in between these two. And then, of course, we have the stages of psychosexual development, the 5 stages. And you can go over that in your book, again, to remind yourself if you don't remember. But what we want to get from this is that personality development is biological. It starts at birth. It ends, in Freud's opinion, at sexual maturity. Although the personality is formed pretty solid in the first 5 or so years of life. Okay, and Freud also believed that any anxieties you had in childhood, if you were mistreated, if you had some sort of trauma, these became traits of your adult personality. All right, we also have Erikson. Erikson was a neo-Freudian, which means new Freudian. So he knew Freud, he spent time with Freud, and he expanded Freud's theory of psychosexual development with his 8 stages. So Erikson was different because he emphasized social influences, which Freud did not. He said personality evolves through challenges associated with the development of the person. You know, you go through life, there's certain challenges you have to face, and so each stage was a crisis that required you to grow as people. Erikson also said that we're rational, we think things through, and he believed the personality and human beings, period, continue to develop throughout life. All right, the big things we want to get from this is that Erikson said that we develop our personality because there are forces placed on our bodies and on our mind. We biologically have to mature. Our brain is changing. Our hormones are changing. Our body is getting stronger as we age and then getting weaker. So there's constantly these maturational or biological forces. There's also social demands placed on you. The older you get, the more people expect you to behave responsibly. And there's certain social norms that you are expected to meet. All right, so we can go over this you can go over this in your book, because we've done this in class already. You have your basic conflicts, basic trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt, and so on. If you have a resolution to the conflict, a positive resolution, I should say, because there's always a resolution before you move on to the next stage. A positive resolution for basic trust versus mistrust would be hope. Okay, you have hope that life is going to be good. Autonomy versus shame, you have a sense of will, sense of power. Initiative versus guilt, you have a sense of purpose. And then this chart is really nice because it also tells you what this turns into in older age. So for basic trust versus mistrust as an infant, if you are taught how to trust, then in older age you have an appreciation of interdependence and relatedness. Relationships are important. Family is important. Okay, so you can go through that on your own. Okay, so this brings us to trait theory, which is probably the most popular theory right now. It's based on a psychometric approach. Psycho meaning psyche, the brain. O, of course, means and, so it's the brain and measurement or metric. So how do we measure the brain? How do we measure the personality? Or if you want to go to the original Greek, psyche means your soul. So this is the measuring approach. We look at personality as a set of traits, and they're measurable. Okay, so how sociable is a person versus how unsociable is a person. It really relies on a lot of statistical techniques. So you take a test, we run statistics on it. It's able to identify answers to questions that correlate with various personality traits, which we'll go through in a little bit. Those are the big 5. Okay, so there is, as I mentioned before, evidence of genetic basis. So we believe that the big 5 traits may be genetically determined in infancy, and then as you get older, it's more obvious where on the scale of the 5 traits you land. But we'll talk about infant temperament and how that correlates to personality in adulthood. I think I skipped individual differences. So each person it falls somewhere on a scale. Okay, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Okay, so these are the big 5, the traits. When we say the big 5, that means that there's 5 basic conceptual characteristics, like these big traits of personality that can be measured. It's complicated, just like measuring intelligence is, because they are concepts. It's not actually something that exists. But the tests work pretty well. They're pretty valid and reliable. All right, let me just put these all up because for some reason they come up out of order. All right, so we have, what is your openness to new experiences? Are you conscientious? Are you an extrovert? Are you agreeable? And what is your level of neuroticism? So all of these are a scale. Openness to new experiences is your risk-taking. Are you closed off to experiences? You just want to do the same thing every day. Are you open to new experiences? You're willing to take challenges and risks. If you're really open, then you might do really dumb stuff with your life, really take some serious risks that might end up getting you killed. If you're too closed off, then you're going to have a pretty boring life. Conscientiousness is your sense of duty. Are you dependable or are you undependable? Now, this does not, you don't do this because you want people to like you or because you want to get along with people. It's your duty. You do this whether you want to or not. So when your 2-year-old is screaming in the middle of the night, do you get up and take care of them? When your 95-year-old mother or grandmother needs to be taken care of, do you say, even though this is going to mess up my plans in life, I'm still going to take care of them because I have a duty to? Do you go to war for your country? Most people don't go to war because they are really excited about it. They go to war because they feel like they have a duty. That's conscientiousness. So a soldier, police officer should have a strong sense of conscientiousness. Extroversion is pretty easy to understand. How outgoing are you, or how much would you prefer to isolate yourself? The easiest way to tell if you're an extrovert or an introvert is to say, do I feel energized when I am around other people, or does it kind of suck my energy? Now, of course, remember this is a scale, so you're not always going to feel energetic around other people. A lot of people say, well, sometimes I like being around other people, but a lot of times I want to be by myself. Well, then you're probably somewhat of an introvert, but close to the middle. So you can be an extreme introvert, you can be an extreme extrovert, and you can be anywhere in between. Agreeableness is often confused with conscientiousness. So agreeableness is you want to get along with people. You want people to like you, you want peace, you want people to be happy with you. And so sometimes we do the same behaviors out of agreeableness that we would do with conscientiousness. So if somebody asks you, would you run an errand for me? Both the conscientious person and the agreeable person are likely to say yes. The conscientious person, because they feel a sense of duty to you for whatever reason. Maybe they're related. Maybe you and the person are related. The agreeable person says yes because they can't say no. They're afraid that you're not going to like them. So somebody who's really high on the agreeable scale is often someone who is really unhappy because they get abused a lot. They're always saying yes to everybody. They can never say no. Somebody really low on the agreeable scale would be like a sociopath. They could care less what people think about them. They can murder somebody and not feel guilty about it. Neuroticism sounds terrible, but it's an old Freudian term that just means anxiety. So how much anxiety do you have? How much do you worry? Women tend to worry more than men do, although that's not always the case, but it is an overall generalization that is true. So are you stable in your anxiety, or are you unstable? Do you worry a little, or do you worry a lot, or somewhere in between? That's the neuroticism scale. A really easy way to remember this is OCEAN. So openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. OCEAN, OCEAN. Or you can do canoe if that helps. Okay, so let's go on to the next theory, which is social learning theory. We've talked a lot about the idea of social learning. So you are learning, your personality is learned based on how you are socialized. Okay? So again, we're looking at personality as a set of behavioral tendencies, a set of traits, a set of characteristics that you have. Social learning theory says these are shaped by interactions with other people, whether that's your parents, your siblings. TV is a person in a sense, the media. All of these are going to shape who you are as a person. And we know this is very true, that this is very powerful. Just compare yourself to somebody from another culture. Okay, even if you take someone who is born in one country and you ship them as a baby to another country, they're going to be very similar to that culture because they adapt to it. As we see in recent immigrants to America, you have first generations and then second generations, and the newly immigrated immigration is very traditional, while their children become very Americanized. Okay, so that's the idea of social learning theory. We learn, our personality is learned based on our interactions. This was developed by researchers like Albert Bandura, if you guys remember him from social learning theory that we talked about before with the Bobo doll study. Okay, so he came up with this idea that we observe other people's behaviors, and that helps to shape who we are as people. This theory really rejected the idea of stages. So it was not like Freud, it was not like Erikson. It said that personality is just continually shaped, okay? And our social situations, the cultures that we find ourselves in will change us. Okay, so they did not believe that our personality was just, we have a personality and that's the end of the story. They believed personality was based on our social interactions. Now, usually personality doesn't seem to change because our social system does not change. However, if you move from America to China, who you are as a person, according to social learning theory, is going to significantly change. Okay? So there's no universal stages, there's no enduring traits of personality. Okay? Personality is not consistent unless the situation that you are in is consistent. But if the situation changes, who you are as a person changes. So people change as the environment changes.